Greetings, Matt Hall here from Hidden Machine once again to talk about Steam Next Fest demos. That's right, last week was the Steam Next Fest, and I played a ton of demos, and I want to talk to you about those games today. Now, for the most part, these are games that are currently in development, and they had a demo briefly available during the Steam Next Fest, so you can't really play most of these games right now. But this video will give you a look at where those games are at, and hopefully you learn about something new. Before we go too far, I want to set a few rules. Firstly, this is not any sort of ranking. These games are going to be presented in the order that I played them. Secondly, I spent less than an hour with each game, and sometimes a whole lot less than an hour. Sometimes that's because the demos were just really short, but other times it's because I ran into a game-breaking bug or some especially unsavory sexual content, and in those cases I just moved on to the next game. Lastly, these games were picked mostly at random. I didn't really make any effort to stick to any genres or developers that I'm especially fond of. There were a few games I tried out specifically because I saw them suggested online by other people that, I enjoy their tastes. But aside from that, I pretty much went to the Steam Next Fest page and just started clicking on demos and downloading things. So in some cases that really worked out, and in some it didn't. But let's check out the list right now with the first game, Grim Guardians Demon Purge. This is a Castlevania-inspired game that has you taking on the role of two demon-hunting sisters who find themselves transported into the demon realm. You can switch between the characters on the fly, and each one has unique abilities. One sister has a gun, and the other uses a melee attack, and seeing as she's the shorter of the two, she can also crawl to reach certain areas. When one sister is downed, the other restarts from the beginning of the room you were in, and you can perform CPR to revive your sister. Aside from these unique mechanics, if you've played any Castlevania game in the last 25 years, you'll pretty much know what to expect from the gameplay and level design. Everything here looks and sounds great. It plays really well, and that shouldn't be a surprise, seeing as the game comes from Inti Creates, which is the same developer and publisher who brought us the Bloodstained Ritual of the Moon games. But even for how well it plays, the writing might turn some people off. It's definitely got this sort of horny anime schoolgirl thing going on, and the main antagonist here uses the same hell pun way too many times in a row. Also, upon being revived, one of the sisters says that she's back and not so black.
Maya's back and not so black. Yeah.
And while that statement may be true, it's a very cringy line, and I can only imagine what other sorts of goofball dialogue is in this game. But if you're into this sort of thing, the game is out on February 23rd on pretty much every platform. Valfaris Mecha Therion is the sequel to 2019's Valfaris, which was an awesome run-and-gun platformer that feels like it took all the best elements of games like Contra and Turrican and put them into this heavy metal blender. Mecha Therion sees the protagonist of the last game return, but instead of a platformer, we've got a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up that plays like a pumped-up version of Forgotten Worlds or Sector Z. The combat combines shooting and melee in a really fun way that feels like a very natural progression of the combat from the first game. The graphics have this beefed up PS1 or PS2 look to them, with low-resolution textures being combined with powerful lighting and effects that give the whole thing a really unique vibe. This game is set to release sometime in 2023, and I'll definitely be picking it up. Dust and Neon immediately reminded me of West of Dead. However, Dust and Neon is much more fast-paced, and it lets you be a lot more agile in combat. There's all of the roguelite looter-shooter trappings that you'd expect in a game like this, but the real star here is the combat. You reload each bullet manually, making battles feel frantic and cover feel especially essential. The controls are so smooth, this game feels really great to play. It's pretty by the book in terms of what to expect from the mechanics and upgrades and everything, but it's just so well executed. I absolutely loved this demo, and I will definitely be picking up the full game when it drops later this month. Radio the Universe is a game that had me intrigued from the moment I booted it up. It's a really promising game that evoked memories of the desolate future scenes in Chrono Trigger, and the sort of endless descent into the labyrinths of Silent Hill 2. Despite that, the game feels completely unique. There's a mix of action RPG combat with exploration and light puzzle mechanics, all delivered in this really stunning, glitchy pixel art style. In combat, you receive experience points by getting an enemy's HP down to 0. For instance, your initial melee attacks will either do 2 or 3 damage, based on whether you perform a heavy or light attack. So if an enemy only has 2 HP, you want to make sure you do a light attack instead of a heavy attack, so you don't go, over 0 down to -1. Getting the enemy's HP down exactly to 0 gets you the XP bonuses. This really pushes you to vary your strategy and not just spam heavy attacks. I really don't want to say too much about this one because it feels like the exploration and mystery and discovery are essential parts of the experience, but I would strongly recommend putting this game on your Steam wishlist. Die by the Blade focuses on intense PvP sword combat. You have different stances and attacks, as well as different defensive maneuvers and parries. This is the kind of fighting game that is way beyond my skill level, and to be honest, I couldn't finish the tutorial because I couldn't understand how to pull off this sequence. I did it once, but I don't know why I couldn't do it again. I also couldn't find a match for multiplayer, which is unfortunate because I would like to experience the combat against another player. I also ran into weird issues with the camera during the tutorial. I would really like to say more about this game, but unfortunately that was my entire experience with it, so oh well. Prison City is an NES-inspired action platformer. The game has a solid presentation all around, and it has several difficulty settings, including a custom one. A lot of older platformers on the NES were made to be unnecessarily difficult, with regional changes made to the games, like removing health bars, decreasing the number of continues, and rebalancing enemies to make them more aggressive. Supposedly, this was sometimes done to combat the rental market, so that players would be more inclined to purchase a game that they couldn't finish over the course of a rental period. Regardless, I think it's cool to have so many options for difficulty in a game like this. The gameplay reminded me a little bit of Shatterhand, which I think is a really good, often overlooked NES title, and overall the gameplay, graphics, controls, and presentation overall were just really solid in this game, and I definitely look forward to playing it when it eventually comes out. I'm not sure if I'm saying this right, but Enenra is a fast-paced hack-and-slash game that looks pretty sharp at first glance, but it failed to really pull me in. It all feels like asset store flips, with wave after wave of identical enemies coming at you, and you mostly just slam the Y button to attack. There doesn't appear to be any campaign or anything in the game, at least not in the demo, so it's mostly just a sort of combat sandbox. It does play really well, but it's super repetitive, so I don't know, I'd say pass on this one. The Lost Bloodline is an action RPG that I just could not get into. The controls were super awkward for me, but that's probably because I don't play many games like this with keyboard and mouse, and the demo here didn't have any controller support. I don't know, I feel like there's a lot of Unreal Engine games out there, especially on this list, that have really clean visuals, but feel very clunky when it comes to gameplay and controls. The game does seem promising in some ways, and I get the feeling that there's a lot of depth here, but I'm probably not in the target audience for this one. That's a nice way of saying I thought it was bad. No, it's probably good for someone. Meatgrinder is a play on the cluster truck formula, except instead of just doing truck-to-truck parkour, you also kick, shoot, and grapple. I think this game could be a lot of fun, but I think that the controls were kind of awkward. You move with WASD, and you kick and grapple with E and F. It had me doing this sort of claw thing, and I don't know, it didn't feel right to use this hand, and I don't know, it was weird for me. Personally, I was hoping to play this one with a controller, and it looks like controller support might be planned for the future, but I couldn't get it working with the demo. The other big issue that I ran into was this bug where I would just fall into a truck and not be able to get out. I left a comment about this on one of the devs' posts about the game, but I didn't get a response, so I don't know. I think this game looks promising, and it could be a lot of fun, but I didn't have a great time with the demo, and I guess I'm just gonna have to wait and see how the full game develops. Cook Serve Forever is basically a never-ending series of QuickTime events. There's some cute hand-drawn art here that people might like, but I barely looked up at it because I was focused on the QTE part of the game. I feel like I might have been missing the point of this one. For me, it was like the game equivalent of a fidget spinner. I was doing pretty well with it until this came up, and I'm not entirely sure what I was supposed to do here. Pressing the direction that was displayed sorta showed the button, but even though I was pretty sure I was hitting the right buttons, I kept failing. That wasn't in the tutorial, so I have no idea. I guess, keep an eye on this one if you just fucking love QTEs. It's set to enter early access this April. We've got another sword fighting game with Dad by the Sword, a game that invites you to play as your dad. The game seems to lean real hard into suburban dad tropes, and it seems like it's full of goofball dad humor mixed with surprisingly in-depth sword combat. I had a little trouble getting used to the controls at first. You move with WASD, but WASD also controls the direction of your sword swings. It was odd for a moment, but it actually felt pretty natural once I got the hang of it, kind of like you're following through and stepping into every swing of your sword, which feels really big and natural, and, the attacks feel like they have some weight to them because of that. Big naturals. I'd love to know more about this game, but I encountered a progress halting bug in the tutorial, and I had too many other demos to try. That said, I did watch a few other folks play through the demo, and it looks pretty solid. The game is set to release this summer, so if it looks good to you, keep an eye out for it. Slave Zero X is a stylish hack-and-slash beat-em-up that looks and sounds just like a hyper-violent 1980s anime. The way that the side-scrolling wraps around in this sort of 3D effect is really cool looking to me. The game is all about stacking stylish combos, and it's a lot of fun, especially if you're into the beat-em-up genre. I can't say enough about how cool the game looks to me. It's just got a lot of really strong style, and again, I said it, but it feels like a lost anime. It feels like one of those rare, violent, hyper-disgusting, bloody animes that you would import in the 90s, and now it's a game. My only complaint here is that I have no idea what half of the buttons even do. Like, a little tutorial or instruction manual would go a long way for me on this one. But either way, I'm definitely going to pick it up when it eventually releases. Mr. Sun's Hatbox is a fun little pixel platformer that incorporates the base building and Fulton balloon mechanics from Metal Gear Solid 5. The controls and graphics are super tight in this game, and it's a total blast to play. There's stealth, shooting, and melee, and the writing is pretty funny. The demo really gives the impression that there's going to be a lot to discover in this game. Basically, you go out on missions, collect items and personnel, and build everything up so that you can go on more missions. It's a simple and effective gameplay loop, and this one is just solid all around. And there's even a co-op mode. This game does not yet have a release date, but I am super eager to learn more about it and its development. Candlelight is an action platformer that takes some cues from the Souls genre. Honestly, I was not wild about this one. It feels a bit empty, and the sound effects really don't give enough feedback for me. There were several times where I was attacked because I thought I defeated an enemy, but they were still alive. Enemies make this little piff sound when they're defeated that I found really hard to hear, and certain actions don't seem to make any sound at all, which gives the game a very unfinished feeling. However, I can't really complain because the game is unfinished. There is some promising stuff going on here for platformer fans, but I don't think this game is right for me. Repo Man is a game that looks very interesting in concept, but it was another one of those Unreal Engine games that tended to be very poorly optimized. I had these console prompts running over the whole game, and I was exhausting resources immediately. I don't know, I have a new PC being delivered to me later this month, so maybe I can revisit this one in the near future. It's hard to believe that it was 20 years ago when I first played WarioWare on the Nintendo GameCube. It quickly became one of my favorite series, and I'm surprised that I haven't seen more games pay tribute to it. Super 56 is clearly inspired by the WarioWare games, and it does a fantastic job of capturing the simplicity, humor, and absurdity of that series. If you're unfamiliar, the WarioWare series is basically a bunch of rapid-fire microgames where you get a prompt or some sort of objective, and you have a few seconds usually to figure it out, and then you move on to the next game. Super 56 is another game that I don't want to say too much about in this video, because a huge part of its appeal is just seeing the mini-games and trying them for the first time and figuring them out. I will say that the entire game, even the menus, are played entirely with the A button and nothing else, and it's pretty fun. It's a very quirky mechanic that works surprisingly well. And I don't want to say too much, but check this one out. Play the demo if you can. I'm not sure if it's still available, but the game should be releasing before too long. I think WarioWare is one of the best, most important games ever made, and this is a great tribute to it. It's a lot of fun. You don't want to miss this one. Trust me, this is really good stuff. Super Hero Flash Fist is essentially a hentai game. It looks like it was made in RPG Maker. It's very poorly translated, and it has pretty basic turn-based combat. If you lose, you get ripped by a goblin with large hands. I tried this demo for a few minutes out of a morbid curiosity, but I'm definitely going to pass on the full game. This one's not for me. Blue Wednesday is a narrative-driven rhythm game about a depressed loser who's trying to be less of a depressed loser. The game has a really charming art style, and the writing is surprisingly funny. This isn't the kind of game that I would normally pick up, but the demo really intrigued me. There's a variety of mini-games, there's adventure game elements, and there's a lot of decisions to make and places to explore. The whole thing has this handcrafted, loving feel to it, and I'll definitely be keeping an eye on the game's development. Tourist Trap is a quirky point-and-click adventure game. A giant corporation has set up a town where poor people live their lives on display for tourists that visit the area. The corporation is also doing some shady genetic experiments on the inhabitants of the town, and our protagonist here gets pulled into trying to get to the bottom of everything. I really liked the look of this game, but it's so slow. Most adventure games I've played from years past often allowed you to double-click to snap or run to destinations, but this game doesn't have any features like that. Also, every character says blah 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 instead of actually speaking their dialogue, and after a few minutes, it became super irritating.
Blah 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 blah. Blah 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 blah. Blah blah blah. Blah?
I think there's probably a really interesting story to be told here, but between the pacing and the annoying voiceover, I was just turned off by this one. Another poorly translated game, Editor's Hell, is a less exciting take on the formula established by Papers, Please. You are the editor of a newspaper, and you have to decide what news to print and which writers to assign stories to. The game constantly warns you about the impact of your decisions, but the demo didn't really show any of that, and everything felt very inconsequential. I got through about 3 or 4 rotations, and then the demo abruptly ended, and I don't know if I really care to return to the full game when it eventually releases. Guitar Zeros offered more of a brief teaser than a full-on demo. It's a deck-building storytelling game about a DIY punk band going on tour. I was excited to check this out because I've been in that very situation many times over the years. Basically, each card has a number value, and you need to get your number higher than the number of the opposing scenario that you've found yourself in. It's very simple, and honestly kind of underwhelming at the moment, but it has a lot of charm, and the devs say they're hard at work on adding animations, boss battles, and a full soundtrack. I put this game on my Steam wishlist. I think it'll be a lot of fun to check this one out once it comes together a bit more. Hot Guns International Missions is like a hardcore pixel art obstacle course. From what I can tell, you only use 2 buttons, one for shooting and one for jumping, and the stick to move. Everything is out to kill you in this game, and ultimately it felt more like one of those really cruel Mario Maker levels rather than a game that I wanted to spend any serious amount of time with. There's co-op for up to 4 players, which includes local co-op, something that has been exceedingly rare in modern games, but I have a feeling that that would just make things even more confusing for me. This is probably going to be a very fun game for some people, but not for me. VanillaBeast Retro Knockout. So imagine Punch-Out!, but it's mixed with the sort of humor that you'd find in Duke Nukem Forever. There's cocaine, titties, and pop culture parodies, complete with what appears to be CG renderings of nude women on virtual trading cards, which I was promised will be fully uncensored in the full game. I was never good at Punch-Out!. That was one of the few NES games that I never actually got to play back in the day, and because of that, I wasn't any good at this one either, but I think you can already tell if you'll be into this game or not. Scene Investigators is geared toward fans of true crime. It's a first-person game that has you investigating a crime scene and answering questions about what took place there. You have 5 questions to be answered based on the evidence that you collect. I spent some time checking out the scene, entered my answers, and was told that I got 2 out of 5 correct. Then the demo ended. Alright. Troublemaker is a game that feels like it exists at the intersection between Bully and Yakuza. There's more story here than there was gameplay, and a lot of my time in the demo was spent having me walk from one waypoint marker to the next, reading a bunch of dialogue, and then going on to the next waypoint marker. The combat is somewhat reminiscent of the Yakuza games, and it features similarly over-the-top animations. However, I found the game to be kinda clunky, and it's yet another one of those Unreal Engine games that doesn't feel optimized at all. I think that someone who really enjoys high school drama anime stuff might be really into this game, but I didn't really enjoy it. Randy Blaster 3D is a big in-joke for boomer shooter fans. The game currently only offers a survival mode wherein you take on waves of enemies. This might be more fun once there's a campaign added, but I didn't have any strong feelings about this game, and it seems like it really only exists to make fun of Randy Pitchford. That's fine, I guess, but at the moment, it's just a low-quality Doom clone with no maps, so I don't know. Sorry. Overboss is a game that needs a proper tutorial, because I had no fucking clue what to do here. Drain Mansion. I accidentally clicked the install button on this game while trying to download the demo for Valfaris Mecha Therion. We've had some good laughs covering other horny games on the channel, so I figured I'd just roll with it and cover this game. Well, it's about a brother and sister, and about 5 seconds into the game, I was raped by a witch. Now, I'm no prude, but this game fucking sucks, and I uninstalled it in well under a minute. Changing gears now, Super Greedy Cat is a fun pixel platformer where you run through courses and you're judged on 3 criteria: how quickly you complete the course, how many of the coins you collect, and whether or not you can find the hidden fish. I was having a lot of fun with this game, but I got stuck on this jump and I could not figure out how to progress through the level. I don't want to take points away from this game for that. I feel like I'm really misunderstanding something here, so maybe someone can fill me in. Route 66 Simulator is another poorly optimized Unreal Engine game. This one sees you embark on a solo trip down Route 66. But first, you need to put a bunch of parts into your car. Now, I've never owned a car, and I haven't even driven one in over 15 years. So I was pretty lost on this. But despite spending quite a while trying, I couldn't find where to stick this belt, and my time with the game came to an end. Pass. Pizza Kid is a pretty standard side-scrolling beat-em-up with some really nice animations and sprites. The game does feel a bit sparse at the moment, but it plays pretty well, and I think it's promising. Unfortunately, I did hit this... At the moment, the game feels a bit sparse, but promising. Unfortunately, I hit this bug during what I think was a boss encounter, and I had to move on. Return is a desolate, bleak game about exploring a hostile and alien environment. There's a sort of classic Game Boy feel to the colors and pixels here, and tonally, it reminded me a little bit of Apocalyptic Vibes, which is another in-development game that I'm really looking forward to. Return is super cryptic, but it seems like the type of story that slowly unfolds as you play. The controls and combat feel super tight, even though I couldn't beat this giant guy during my initial session with the game. This game was really intriguing to me, and I'm very curious to eventually learn more about it. Gravity Circuit is a really fun take on the classic Mega Man formula. Rather than an arm cannon, you have a close-range melee attack and a bionic commando-style grappling hook, which you can also strike enemies with. Music, graphics, level design, everything here is really tight. It's hard to say much about a game that really just feels like a Mega Man 3 mod, but if you like the Mega Man games at all, you'll likely really enjoy this. Bounty Heart is a match 3 roguelite with some RPG mechanics like party building, spell casting, and items that can affect your stats. I was really into this one. It's the kind of game that I could spend a lot of time with. A quick search on the game shows that it was a student project originating from the University of Southern California. It seems like there was a mobile port available for both Android and iOS at some point last year, but the iOS version is gone and I'm not sure about the Android one. I reached out to the devs about this, but they basically said that their focus is on the PC version at the moment. I'm really hoping that the mobile version can come back because this is the kind of game that I would love to have on the go. Spy Bros, parentheses, Pipi and Bibi's DX, is a remaster of a 1991 arcade game that originally went by Whoopee or Pipi and Bibi's. It's a classic single-screen arcade game where you have to plant bombs on all these computers and then rush to the exit before they all explode. You have this ranged stun attack that will knock enemies down one floor, or knock them out of the level entirely if they're on the bottom floor. It's a fun game, but it's definitely dated. This Spy Bros rebranding is due to the fact that the game has been heavily censored. In the original, there's a bunch of obscured images of naked women, which you slowly uncover by completing stages. There's also stuff like this. Honestly, it's a fun game either way, and if you really need to see nudie pics, there's plenty of other places to find them. Extreme Evolution Drive to Divinity. Wow, this game is wild. It's like speaking without words. The game has its own alien way of communicating objectives and mechanics that seem totally incomprehensible at first, but slowly make themselves understood through interaction and experimentation. You traverse these different courses, collecting this currency that allows you to take different forms. Every time you change forms, you use a little bit of that currency, and it resets every time you go to a new environment or restart the map. If you get stuck, you can easily reset the course or travel to another course without any penalty. Mechanically, it's somewhere between Super Monkey Ball and Marble Madness, but with some very unique twists. This is a game that is definitely worth exploring and just feeling out. It's a very rewarding experience, and I'm super excited to check out the full game eventually. The demo for Driftwood only featured a tutorial and a single course, but I had a lot of fun with it. It has you playing as a longboard riding sloth. It kind of reminds me of Lonely Mountain Downhill, but it's much more fast-paced than that game. You can get extra points for things like scattering objects on the road and cutting it close to vehicles. You can lean forward or backward to adjust your speed, and drift left and right with the triggers. The controls are super intuitive, and the game just plays so smoothly. From what I've read, this game is being put together by a 2-person development team, and I'm really looking forward to seeing more from them. Olliefrog Toad Skater is pretty much a cute little Tony Hawk's Pro Skater clone where you play as a frog. There's a lot of goofy customization options and some fun music. Gameplay-wise, it's pretty much identical to the Tony Hawk games. It's fun, and I really appreciated that I was able to continue skating even when I fell into the water, because I'm a frog and frogs can do that. Personally, I think this game will need to lean into the underwater stuff and the absurdity in its presentation to really stand out, but it's definitely on the right track from everything I can see here. The Darkest Files is a very slow-paced game about investigating Nazi crimes in a post-World War II Germany. The game has you poring over files and interviewing people relevant to your cases. As you interview people, you sort of enter their memories and can prod for more information. I think it's a really interesting way to represent someone's memories, and it's a neat way to handle the investigative or detective-type genre in general. The game has a really strong art style, and it's all based on true events. There's some really powerful storytelling here, and if you're a fan of mysteries or true crime, I think you might really like this one. The Gray Man is an extremely cryptic point-and-click adventure about a serial killer. The game is extremely dark, both literally and in its tone. It's brutal and gruesome, but the unconventional design here is really intriguing to me. I was totally confused by a lot of what was happening, but in a way that pushed me to keep exploring and trying to decipher the surreal situation that I found myself in. This demo is an early beta build of the game, and I'm definitely going to be following its continued development. Shadows of Doubt is the kind of immersive sim that makes me feel like I'm too dumb for immersive sims, because I always wind up making some horrible decisions or getting completely lost. Essentially, the game constructs a seemingly randomly generated city, and you take on the role of a private investigator who is tracking a serial killer in that city. It's really well done, super engaging, and it has this sweet evidence board with the red thread and everything, but I'm really in over my head with games like this. Regardless, I think this game is going to do very well, especially with fans of immersive sims, and I do plan on revisiting it when the full game comes out. Endlight takes the flying through hoops premise of Superman 64 and turns it into a cyber psychedelic mindfuck that feels like you're flying through a sentient version of the PS2 startup screen. It's a really interesting game that feels both casual and hardcore at the same time. I've never really played anything like it before. It's almost like what would happen if the cyberspace sections of System Shock had weird gimmick physics controls. I feel like everything I'm saying about this game could be taken the wrong way, but I'm trying to communicate that this is a very good, very unique game that you should try out. Godfist is a first-person roguelite that's all about punching guys off of a tower. Ascend the tower, punch, kick, or spear these beings off the edges, you collect loot, level up, and repeat. There are different power-ups and abilities you can earn, and you roll for your power-ups when using them, which adds this sort of frantic, randomized aspect to the combat. I haven't yet been able to successfully finish a run, but this is a really solid idea for a game, and I can definitely see myself getting pretty deep into it. City of Beats is a top-down roguelite rhythm shooter. You hold the right trigger, and your main gun fires to the tempo of the music. You have a second, slower, and more powerful attack that also fires on beat. You dash around, shoot robots, get power-ups, complete the cycle, and repeat the cycle. It's nothing new in terms of the basic structure, but the rhythm-based shooting is a fun break from the norm here. The demo lacks a lot of the features planned for the full game, but it already seems like there's potential for a really great experience here. Next up, Gestalt, Steam, and Cinder. Wow, I did not want to put this game down while I was playing it, but I had a lot of other demos to get to, so I did put it down. But this game rules. It's got pixel art that feels like it could have been taken from somewhere between the 16 and 32-bit eras. There's RPG elements like this huge skill tree and a lot of side quests. There's satisfying hack and slash combat with a variety of weapons and attacks, Metroidvania style exploration, a strong narrative, and overall it's just fun to play. This was definitely one of the stronger games that I played over Steam Next Fest, and I can't wait to check out the full game. I really can't. I don't feel like I sound believable. Dungeons of Aether is a turn-based RPG in the anthropomorphic animal style that gives me big furry vibes. It's part of the series of Aether games created by Dan Fornace. Fornace? I don't know. There's a bunch of these games in different genres, and to be honest, it's really not my thing. I do have some early funny animal comics, and some of the more eclectic anthropomorphic books from the 80s, and while it's an interesting niche, it's not one that I really identify with. Beyond that, this game in particular is a bit too mathy for me. You're essentially trying to make sure that your numbers are bigger than the enemy's numbers, and each turn you roll a set of dice that you can apply to your stats as modifiers. I think that it's very well made, and someone who is into this sort of thing is probably going to love it, but that person isn't me. Mr. Saitou, I think I'm saying that right, but I don't know. It's a RPG Maker game. I'm pretty sure this is an RPG Maker game. It's about a Japanese salaryman who winds up hospitalized, and he turns into a llama worm, which is a giant worm that shares qualities with a llama. The art in this game is really nice, and there are these really well animated cutscenes, and a lot of strong character designs. The Steam page describes it as a heartwarming, non-combat story with an emphasis on humor and building friendships. Honestly, I'm not into games like this, but it was definitely made with a lot of care, and if it sounds like something that you'd be interested in, I don't think this one's going to let you down. I said that it's likely an RPG Maker game, which can make things feel cheap or generic, but this is miles ahead of any other RPG Maker game that I've seen on Steam. Ray and Stoic Gronk is a satirical take on the Zelda 2 formula. The writing is pretty crass, but I found it to be funny. Gameplay is pretty smooth, although the combat that I experienced feels undercooked. Maybe I'm just really early on in the game, but most enemies don't seem to pose any threat at all, which is a far cry from the combat in Zelda 2. Regardless, this one is pretty good, and I'm really interested to see how the full game develops. I'm a huge fan of Zelda 2, and this game does a nice job of building up on that foundation. In the game, you play as a relatively silent protagonist who has been paired up with a wisecracking talking sword. Of course, hilarity ensues. One minor complaint I have is the menus. I found them hard to navigate. I noticed this on a bunch of these demos, so I don't mean to single out Ray and Stoic Gronk, but whatever you have selected in the menu becomes slightly shaded. So slightly that I didn't even notice it when I was first opening up the menus. It's an odd design choice to me. I think some kind of added highlight or stroke around the selected option would go a long way. But menu gripes aside, I think this is a really fun game that NES fans, especially fans of Zelda 2, will get a big kick out of. Gripper is a narrative-driven bike game. To be honest, I didn't get it at all. I found the storytelling to be very muddled and confusing, and the gameplay was awkwardly difficult. I never really felt like I understood what was being asked of me. The tunnel sections look awesome, but I was constantly fucking them up. And when the view switched to these overhead combat scenarios, I was even more lost. I tried, I really tried, but I didn't even realize that I was being hit most of the time. I could tell that whoever was making the game was really passionate about it, and when I looked up the lead dev on Twitter, I noticed that he had a pinned tweet stating that #GameMaker is a fire of his loins, which sounds super serious to me, so I do think someone is going to absolutely love this game, but that person, it's not me. Rounding things out to an even 50, we have Super Auto Battlemon. Now, I was a pretty big fan of Pokemon back in the mid-90s. Pokemon Red was the first game that I ever emulated, and I also built several card decks that I really enjoyed competing with. I also have a vague memory of having a bunch of imported Japanese cards and trading them with a kid at school for a Game Boy SP, but that was a few years after the height of my interest in the games. Anyway, Super Auto Battlemon is essentially the Pokemon card game reimagined as a roguelite auto battler. Playing it immediately brought me back to playing the card game, and overall I really enjoyed this one. Personally, I do think I still prefer the Pokemon trading card game for Game Boy, but this is still pretty appealing, and I think it would make a killer mobile game. It's hard to say much more about this one. It's basically just Pokemon as an auto battler, but it's pretty good. And that's that. That's all 50 games. Now, to be totally transparent, I did play 51. I also played the updated version of the System Shock remake demo. I covered that on the channel when the first demo dropped. I want to say maybe 2 years ago now. And that was really good. I was really taken with how that was coming along. It's way better now. Man, that game is looking and playing great. Only minor complaint I have on that one is the melee combat on some of the enemies feels like there's like no emphasis to the strikes, and it doesn't even feel like I'm hitting anyone. It really weird to see such kind of weak sound design, and I don't know there's like not like a thud or a crack when you're striking someone with a giant pipe. But hey, System Shock remake is looking pretty good. We'll see if it ever comes out. I think it's been in development for 26 years at this point. But hey, those were the demos I played. I want to ask you, did you play any Steam Next Fest demos? If so, what were some of the good demos you played? What were some of the not so good demos you played? Are there games that you're looking forward to? Did you learn about a game in this video that you're excited for? Or a game that you saw and you go, wow, that looks terrible. I need to leave a mean comment about it. Let me know down below, and if you like this, please give it a like, subscribe. We got new videos coming out all the time. You can meet us up on Discord to chat about games some more, and we got a huge back catalog of other videos for you to check out while you wait for new ones to happen. So please, just get on board. Get on the Hidden Machine train. Please. Peace.